Entrepreneur Perspectives is produced by Quiet Loud Studios, a production company and content network. Learn more at quietloudstudios.com.
Well, Chris, we're excited to have you here. We're really looking forward to listening and hearing about your business. I was looking at your website some this morning and really interesting, and I've got a million questions for you. So tell me a little bit about you and where you're from and where you went to college. I saw you were a Division I athlete on there, so I'm interested to hear about that.
Yeah, of course. I'd love to tell you a little bit more about me. So I grew up in Michigan, and I lived in Westchester area, just outside New York City, a little north of New York City now with my family. Married with my wife and 3 kids. We have an 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 3-year-old. It's all over the board.
So you're busy.
Yeah, a little bit. Sorry for the bags under the eyes. But yeah, life is good. So I grew up in Michigan, loved fitness and athletics as a kid growing up, played a bunch of sports. And then I went down to the University of Florida, ran for the Gators for a couple of years as a Division I athlete. And that was absolutely awesome. Like, just really cool to be at such an elite program and one of the best runners in the country in the 800 meters is what my specialty was at the time.
Wow.
And also 600 meters indoors. But got injured like a lot of athletes at some level do. You're at this 0.1% of pushing your body and things happen. And lo and behold, a couple of years into the program, my injuries accumulated and just kind of like couldn't get in front of them anymore. And I realized that, the ripe old age of 20, that I had more to life to give besides just track and field. And so transferred back to Michigan and went to school at Michigan State, graduated from Michigan State where my older brother was at. I was always raised as a Michigan fan, which lo and behold is kind of interesting because I'm going back to get my MBA at the University of Michigan here starting in September. Yeah, so it's a full circle. I'll be a busy boy on top of everything else, but they have some great hybrid type programs now. It's a full MBA, but you don't have to do it 2 years off and living in that area. You can go back and forth a few times. And a lot of it can be done, through online, just like we're doing now. It's pretty cool post-COVID world that we live in for business and education and so many other facets and podcasts and everything else. And then I double majored and I really love econ and international relations. Those are my 2 majors. And I love the business world. And around this time is when I started reading the Robert Kiyosaki books, the Rich Dad Poor Dad books, which obviously is very appropriate for, this podcast. But I still taken on good internships in the investment banking that I was able to get in the consulting world and was offered some pretty good jobs, but I couldn't graduate enough times. When I transferred school, you lose some credits and then you had to get those credits back in another, degree format because it doesn't exactly line up for every university, especially where you're upper levels. So I had 1 extra semester to go and the lead partner at an investment bank offered me a job and I was just like, I wanted to do it. And at the time, this is, 2002, 2003, give or take. And I wasn't able to leave campus early to go. Now it'd be like a no-brainer. They'd be like, okay, you can just zoom in. I'm back 22, 24 years ago, they couldn't do that. And then I worked in finance in Chicago for Morningstar for like 9 months. I was like, I want to be my own business person. My older brother had bought into Servpro, a franchise system that did the glamorous work of water power and low damage work.
I know all about them.
Yeah. Probably hopefully not in a bad way where you're like, oh yeah, my house flooded or fire in your house, whatever. But things happen. That's why we have a home insurance, property insurance for commercial buildings as well. And so for me, I love the recession resistant business model that offered. And it wasn't my calling in life, if you will. It wasn't like I was super passionate about it. But I think you can get passionate about any business if you're building a team, making money, you're helping consumers or your customers or members out, that sort of thing. And when you're in your early mid-20s, you got your teeth very quickly in that world. It's a 24/7, 365 business. You're hiring people that are 3 or 4 decades older than you at the time. I mean, I was hiring people, I think, in their early 60s that had a lot of experience in contracting or the insurance world. And so to do that in your 20s, you got to grow up very, very quickly. It wasn't like you were working in a corporate job where you kind of had an umbrella of a training program and that sort of thing. And here's your hand-holding experience. It's like, no, you're actually responsible for building your team, for producing, 7 figures in revenue to support your business and royalties to this franchisor and everything else. So that business was great, but also wore me out in a lot of ways, mentally. And we wanted to expand. This is the good and bad part about franchising within a good franchisor is you can expand if you do the right things, you follow the system. Usually you'll have success. That's why people buy into a franchise, right? And I think Servpro is one of the best franchise systems people can get into. But it's not necessarily, it was at the time, I don't know if they've changed or not, but they've sold to Blackstone. It used to be a family run business, but they sold to Blackstone 8 years ago, I believe, for $1 billion.
Oh, wow.
maybe 6 years ago. So it's there's a lot of money in that,
Oh,
that
yeah. No
property
doubt.
restoration world. As a lot of the private equity companies are starting to roll up the mom and pop like HVAC and plumbing companies, and they're starting to realize that there's a lot. It doesn't always have to be this like Silicon Valley AI driven business world anymore. You can use that business world to help out with the service based world tremendously.
Yep.
And I think the smarter operators are starting to realize that, and they're able to roll up and a diverse array of different types of home and commercial related service companies and scale operations and do that. But anyway, so back to how I got into the fitness world. Obviously,
Right.
you're probably like, well, how the heck do you get in the fitness world? Well, at the age of 28, realized that we couldn't expand beyond our 4 franchises. That was the limit at the time. We kind of had this idea that we could expand up the East Coast. We were in South Florida at the time, and maybe along the Gulf area for hurricane related, but also just in
Oh, yeah.
general. And I didn't really like personally. I didn't really like to live in South Florida. It wasn't my thing, with my calling in life. And it just was like I grew up in Michigan. I kind of liked nature and outdoors and not as much traffic, and just wasn't my calling in life to live down in South Florida. And so I was like, hey, we had a buyer approach us. He owned a bunch of thrifty car rental dealerships, and he had some 20-something-year-old sons, and they bought us out, and the rest is history. And it was right before the '08 financial crisis, and it was one of the last SBA funding deals in the state of Florida, and felt very proud about that. But at the same time, I was like, well, what can I do that I'm truly passionate about? Because I spent the next several months having a mini retirement with my brother. And traveled to Japan and skied in Japan, and we surfed in Brazil. And we were our fans went over to Europe and watched soccer games in London and Germany and all
Wow.
this other stuff. So it was
Yeah.
kind of fun for like 3 or 4 months. And at some point, I was like, okay, I'm 28 years old. I got to do something with my life, that I speak to my soul. And so what I did is I was like, okay, I love health and fitness. How can I build a business around that? And I had some friends up in New York City that were in the finance world, and they were like, if you really like the health and fitness world, maybe come up this way. And so kind of like use my business acumen, thinking of life as a chess match and business, the chess match, if you will. And then I started to figure out, okay, I could train elite clientele in New York City. I could do some fitness modeling work as well. I had some people approach me for like the men's health magazines and men's fitness and women's health and writing. And I parlayed that into writing as well. So as a fitness expert, writing articles or appearing in the articles and, putting my 2 cents in on like certain exercises or movements and all that stuff, and kind of took into account my track and field background, and then started getting some really great certifications within the fitness world that I thought were very appropriate and very big into education itself. I think it's great. There's a time to apply that education out in the real world for sure, and not just be,
Yep.
you're always an eternal student, but don't be trapped in the academic world. Only put yourself out there at times. So for me, I felt like, let's put myself out there, and I put myself out there and started just really like marketing myself in a whole different way and rubbing, elbows with the right people in New York City, which is the media capital of the world. And at the time, magazines were still pretty prevalent in our life.
Oh, yeah.
Nowadays, not so much, but in the 2010s, they were still pretty much out there. I've appeared on the cover of Men's Fitness several times. And then I was cast in the NBC Strong, which was a big TV show back in 2015, 2016, as one of America's top 10 trainers. That was from the biggest movie producers as well as American Ninja Warrior producers, and also
Wow.
Rocky Sylvester Stallone himself. So that was really
Wow.
cool. That was cool. And that was on NBC primetime at 8 o'clock on a Thursday time slot. And then Netflix eventually bought out that season too. So, and then I really just kind of like always, like I said, chess match style, like looking for opportunity, put on your business hat, seizing that opportunity as best you could, and then moving forward with the knowledge that you had and trusting in yourself. And I think
Right.
that's what it takes for a lot of entrepreneurs is to do that and to really trust themselves and follow. Like, it might not be your exact like what you had in mind, but if you're going to be successful, you can make money and you feel good about doing what you're going to do, you're going to find your passion within that, right? Like Servpro wasn't necessarily my passion initially. Like I didn't know anything about it initially, but I'd love to lead people like in sports. I'd love to be a leader out there on the field, whatever it was when I was growing up in the classroom, giving presentations or speeches, whatever. And so for me, I'd always put myself in that leadership role, which you have to as an entrepreneur. You have to be, take away your, being scared and just put yourself
Right.
out there in life and realize that you're not going to bat 100% every time. And for me, at times, I felt like maybe I was a little bit too much of a perfectionist and realized, oh, I can't fail. right? There's a difference between the understanding I had setbacks or challenges versus like being too scared to even start because you may fail. In 2018, I was approached by a company called Mir that had a startup Series A funding of 10 million bucks from some pretty good sized VC investors out of Silicon Valley. They came out with like the world's first full length interactive mirror that had trainers on there, and ended up being one of those founding trainers that were basically almost like a hologram style, but real life, almost, but like miniaturized version of myself. But you could see yourself working out, so you could see how everything's moving spot because it's a mirror, right? So it was really
Right.
cool, and like something like that had never existed. And so for me, I'd always been more hands on with the training side, with the clients I was working with, or like writing in the media, that sort of thing. I never really thought about like the at home space the way I did
Right.
until I was on Mirror. And then Lululemon bought us out for $500 million in 2020. I wasn't the owner; I was a founding trainer, by the way, but I did have
Right.
stock options, so that was good.
Yeah,
I was like
okay.
one of the first employees, which is cool. But by no means could I still retire for the rest of my life over that deal. But it was still, it was nice for my family and I, and gave it some cushion, even furthermore at an investment level. And then I was able to, stay on with Lululemon for my contract until January 2024. Lululemon kind of moved the studio to an on-demand only format instead of doing live workouts. And then I went in, and after that, I bet on myself yet again, and I set up the Chris Ryan Fitness in a similar format with live and on-demand workouts, which I'm super proud of. And it's been growing ever since. For the last it's been about 2 years now, so just over 2 years. I started at the end of May 2024, and so now I have like 800 plus workouts in the on-demand catalog that I've shot of all sorts of variety, from 15 to 45-minute workouts from beginner to intermediate to advanced level. Workouts that are basically done at home. You can do them at a gym, of course. You don't need a bunch of fancy gym equipment like I have. This is just all for my personal
Right.
workouts to have in the gym that I built. But it's all dumbbell, mini band based or resistance band based, and really targeting that sweet spot of clientele where I'm at right now. I'm 46, but like 35 to 55-year-old busy parents, busy executives, if you will, busy business owners, entrepreneurs, people that don't think they have a lot of time. Sorry, my allergies are really bad, by the way. I don't know what it is. There's
Okay.
so much pollen in the air. And I think got in that season. I was sneezing a lot earlier, but I took a Allegra. But and so moving into that space was pretty cool to like say, now I got to do my own membership, own marketing on social media, own, meta ads, do the Facebook ads, all that stuff, LinkedIn, all of
Yep.
it. So I offer the app, which is kind of like your low hanging fruit as far as the $30 per month price point. And then there's a couple other tiers that I have that I do executive one-on-one coaching as well with people that are looking for more of like the accountability side of things, because
Right.
being consistent, whether you're on an investment level or a marketing level for your business, you're not going to get wins every day, but it's about showing up and being as consistent as possible. That is
Right.
really where you're going to find your true success. It's just like Warren Buffett is just Mr. Consistency for 7 decades or something of investing. And that longevity component was so important to his overall, net worth as it grew. Like he had always said,
Right.
like, if he died at 60, no one would remember his name, but he lived to be in his 90s. So everyone, he was able to compound so much more growth in the last like 30 plus years of his life, last few
Right.
decades of his life, right? In the same way, like in the fitness world, like when you could exercise and work out, every workout that you do only compounds to your longevity, your overall health. At the end of the day, I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they think they have to drive ROI, they have to drive being a leader, they have to drive being available and
Right.
their cell phone glued to them and the email and whatever else. And those are all important things, of course, especially in your building phase. But you got to be, you got to be true to yourself and realize you're a human being. You got to take care of your number one self internally with your health and fitness, no matter what. And I think that when I was back in my Servpro days, the one thing that got me through those like long, long days, working 80-hour weeks and having a cell phone glued to your hip 24/7, 365 for basically like 6 years. I still remember we were on a trip and I just like put my cell phone in the hotel lockbox and I just like it felt like cleansing of the soul where I didn't have to
Yep.
like check it. And it was just like, I'm good. And it was actually BlackBerry at the time. That was the last BlackBerry
I
I
love
ever had.
BlackBerry. I had a
I know,
BlackBerry.
right? But I still remember that's how old it was. It was like put it in the lockbox and I went out for like a whole day of like went for a long run and ate a good
Yep.
dinner. And I think it was going to one of the winter and you ever watch a soccer game and didn't care. Didn't have a care in the world about anyone contacting me or calling me. It was a very cleansing feeling.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, this is interesting. I realized like how much I needed that as an entrepreneur. because you're really out there building things by yourself. And sometimes it's hard for people coming from a corporate background to find an entrepreneur, like, and vice versa, an entrepreneur to go to a corporate background. So
Right.
when I was at Mirror, it was the first W-2 I signed since I was 23, and my first corporate job that I left at 23 years old. And I was only, there for 6 years, but I still kept my Chris Ryan Fitness business, the private side, going concurrently, where
Yeah.
I was training clients in person and on FaceTime and that sort of a thing. I was able to get that grandfathered in my contract since it was already an existing business. I wasn't, direct competitor with the Mirror and Lululemon studio itself. So
I was going to ask you about, I love to work out. I turned 62 yesterday.
congratulations, happy
Yeah.
belated birthday, my man.
So, but I always was a runner, believe it or not. I'm a pretty big guy, 6'4", 250, but I always liked to run and, ran the New York Marathon, ran Chicago. So love to run. As I've gotten older, I've had to kind of modify that a little bit. Can't really do those distances as much. But, my problem is, and I guess I want to hear about, your recommendation to your clients about the nutrition side of it. I absolutely love to work out. I plan to work out every single day. I keep clothes in the car all the time. And like you said, to me, at my age, it's a more mental relaxation. It's unbelievable how a workout can change your mindset. But where I struggle a little bit is I like good food too. And so how do you, kind of balance that nutrition side of it as well?
Yeah, I think, that's a great question. And here's the thing I see a lot with runners is that they think that they burn so many calories and they like earn the right to eat like whatever they want,
Yeah.
right? Because you ran 3 miles or 6 miles. As important that it is for your caloric burn, if you go out and you eat like bacon, egg, and cheese right after, greasy bacon, egg, and cheese right afterward, well, you just negated it all, right? I mean,
Yep.
let's call it what it is. Like you can't,
Yep.
there's only so many calories you can burn physically when you work out. Sometimes there's what we call the EPOC effect, or the excess post-oxidant consumption, which is really cool, where you burn calories lingering on after your workout because of the intensity of that workout itself. But that means it's kind of like a gift that keeps on giving. It's like your dividend, if you will, for the rest of the
Yep.
day. But you got to be careful with that. So I think, like, especially as we get older, go heavier on the protein and the fiber as much as you can. Less on the carbs, especially anything processed. So pastas, breads, those are like anything in a box. So with the proteins, any sort of obviously meat, a fish is great. Lentils are absolutely fantastic. Eggs, all that good stuff is really good for you. But go heavier on the protein and like think more along the lines of protein and fiber. So like the meat, the vegetables, and less on like the simple carbs. Carbs don't get a bad rap like with the sweet potato, by the way. Like that's fun. But like
Yep.
don't try to err on the side of a sweet potato rather than a white potato. Right.
Right.
Now, if you're gearing up for a marathon, of course, then you have to retool that a little bit to where you want to think cleaner, faster burning carbs, right? You want to think more in terms of fuel. So if you're in a, prepping for a race or you're carb loading for a race, it's going to be almost the exact opposite of what you should do in your overall
Right.
general healthy nutrition. Because you're looking for clean burning fuel that hopefully won't upset your stomach in any way and like kind of burn off quicker.
Right.
That's for a certain goal that you have, not necessarily for like overall longevity and health of losing visceral fat around your waist and that sort of a thing.
Right.
And one of the other things I think that, your listeners would get a lot out of is the liquid diet. I think there's a lot of low hanging fruit within the liquid diet for probably the vast majority of people, whether they're drinking sodas, diet sodas, anything out of a can that's not a carbonated water only, but like water, green tea, black coffee, green tea with a tea bag, not in Arizona, out of a can with like
Right.
those whatever chemicals in there. But like just clean, simple ingredients. Like you should be able to pronounce whatever you're drinking or eating, right?
Right.
As much as you eat without a biochemistry degree. And
Right.
I say that because if you look at the back of a label of like a lot of what you eat, you're like, oh, this is fine. This is organic, whatever. And you look at it and you're like, I do not understand these 35 ingredients that I'm reading.
Right.
For one, it's 35 ingredients, right? For another, you got a lot of man-made, scientific, big, heavy words in there that you just shouldn't eat, right?
Right.
And so you got to think like, eat the way your grandparents did. If you look back at like those, like, those vintage like movies where everyone's kind of moving fast because it's like the way that it's shot,
Right.
like from the 1930s, you're like, oh, here's New York City in 1939 or whatever. And you
Right.
see like people walking around, and everyone, all the men are wearing like the hats and
That's it.
right? You know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
And you see those scenes. There's not one person that's overweight. like
No.
literally not one person.
Right.
And, this is before, the post-World War II generation came out because there was a lot of famine, unfortunately, in the world. We had to figure out a way to have like calories bumped up. And, this is when mass-produced foods came out and like farming kind of went down as far as like, before it became mass-produced farms and everything else. So it's like, there's a lot of good that came out of it of like trying to feed people, but a lot of bad because humans will find the least path of resistance no matter what
Right.
it is.
Yep.
So all of a sudden you're eating all these pretty bad calories that are very like simple sugar calories, like white breads and things along that nature, white
Right.
pastas,
Yep.
and not eating like the organic food, like simple foods. Like
Yep.
my wife's Greek American. I love going over to Greece because everything's like just organic and it's simple. It's
Right.
amazing. Like a tomato over there tastes amazing compared to a tomato over here. Even like going to a Whole Foods tomato over here that's, organic and beautiful and red. You go over there and eat like a tomato off like, just out of the flower garden out there or aunt's backyard and it tastes like 100 times better because it's just so
Wow.
pure,
Right.
and that's the way food used to be. And I do feel like going down this rabbit hole on the nutrition supply, but we have a very different food supply compared to what our grandparents had, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is a balance, and because like I ran a half marathon in November, which is probably my last one, by the way. So it really wasn't that fun. I ran a marathon when I was 30, and I ran a marathon 26.2, and it was 3 hours
And
and 30 minutes, which is not a world record, but I beat more than half the field, which I was really proud of.
for a big guy, that's amazing.
It about took me as long to run the half marathon as it did that I ran the marathon at 30. So
Well, you're
you
twice as old now, so there you go. The half and half add up.
But if you look at the calories you burn for that much running, it was about 15 to 1,600 calories is what I burned. So then when
Mhm.
you think about, I can go eat a pizza or half a pizza and put that right back on, so you really have to
100%.
watch the nutrition. Yeah.
Yeah, you really do, and I think that nutrition can be very people on social media and even nutritionists sometimes like to make things very complex for people.
Right.
And I just think like if you generally eat healthy whole foods and you limit yourself to understanding what you're eating so you can pronounce and understand literally like what you are eating. Like I am drinking a glass of water. I am
Right.
drinking a cup of black coffee. I'm not putting added sugars or whipped cream or Dunkachino or whatever the frappuccinos are at all these
Right.
different coffee shops and Starbucks. I look at some of these things at Starbucks that they serve and Dunkin' Donuts, and I'm like, I think it should be illegal. It's like you're literally drinking, you're giving out like diabetes type 2,
Yep.
like right over the counter. And I actually say that with being very serious. I'm like,
Yep.
how do we like obviously everyone knows cigarettes are bad, but in the early 1960s until the FDA came out with like the labels, like people were like, yeah, it's not too bad, you know,
Yeah.
like,
Well,
like it's not that bad. It's like, yeah, of course I got a cough, but it's not that bad. I almost feel like that's the way that we are with these like sugary drinks and cocktails and not alcohol itself, but like alcohol is a whole other thing that we can talk about in a second. But like
right.
just those things that you would drink every day. I had clients that have been like, oh yeah, I drink a hot chocolate or whatever this coffee would be with all this stuff on top of it. I'm like, good Lord, like
Yeah.
you're drinking like basically you drink three of those, that's like a pound of fat. 30,
Yep.
35, 3,600 calories is a pound of fat, like or pound, like and
Yep.
that's what you're drinking. Like that and you're pumping out insulin, drinking these diet sodas and all this stuff and going and getting started on alcohol. Like what I love beer, but
Yep.
you have to limit it. And I think there's some cool, athletic brewing, for instance, have non alcoholic beers out there that you can have and that actually taste like real beer.
Yep.
But I do think that alcohol just really messes up your sleep patterns. You got to limit it. There's no health benefit to alcohol itself. People like to make up excuses for it, but the alcohol messes up your protein synthesis and like the ability to sleep and all that. And the sleep is
A lot
so
of sugar, lot of
important
sugar too, I
and a
guess.
lot
So,
of sugar. And then
yep.
usually you make bad decisions when you're eating or drinking alcohol with the food choices that you have. And I'm not saying you have to be drunk. I'm just saying like one alcoholic drink will say, oh, I want something savory or salty or whatever. And like you end up making more snacking style choices. It's
You do.
proven when you drink alcohol.
Yes.
And not to say, look, I love to have like one beer a week, right? But I don't drink, and I'm talking on the weekend. I don't casually drink. I don't drink like watching a game or anything like that. If anything,
Right.
I kind of curb that feeling of, oh, I'll have a beer and watch the game or whatever. I don't want to be like, saying you can't have fun, but I do think that you have to be cognizant of your choices and realize that you don't need to drink alcohol. Like, have a carbonated water if you want to have something out of a can that's fizzy with no additives to it whatsoever. And that'll kind of almost like feel like you're getting a treat without getting a treat itself.
Right. I wanted to ask you, what's next for your business? Where do you see your business in the next 5 years?
I think really venturing out, making more of like a macro cosm out in the world, developing out into the corporate wellness side. I'd love to start getting more on the B2B side of helping out companies on a macro level, hopefully helping to reduce healthcare costs. What I remember is when I owned my Servpro business is like healthcare. I was like, you're constantly battling your P&L as an
Yeah.
entrepreneur, right?
Yep.
Like, you can control your revenue, obviously, like go out, get more customers, market better, get more jobs, whatever it might be, get more members in my case. You also have your costs. And sometimes people only think revenue, they don't think about the costs. And
Right.
I think the best operators that go there and they can really like go line item by line item on their P&L and understand every cent that can get taken out of your company is a cent taken out of your pocket, whether that's through taxes to Uncle Sam or to any vendor that you hire or insurance or whatever it might be.
Right.
And health insurance is a huge cost
Absolutely.
to most employers, probably second to or third to payroll itself and rent or your mortgage if you own a building or whatever it might be. But in general, like healthcare is like three or top five for most companies out there. And if you can even just curb 5% of that, if there's a way to show positive, effects of following a corporate wellness program on a macro level. And I'm not saying that we're going to turn people into Navy SEALs and marathoners or,
Right. Yeah.
looking like Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm just
Right.
talking about like generally getting people to work out several days a week for 15 to 30 minutes. It's been shown on a scientific metabolic level to be like astronomical for
Yep.
these people.
I
And so if
believe it.
you could do that for like 50 to 500 person companies, well, you're affecting, maybe you can get 50% of the people to do it. All of a sudden that company hopefully could like cut their healthcare costs down by like 5 or 10% maybe. And 5 or 10% on a 500-person company, you're talking,
Big
hundreds of
dollar.
thousands of dollars right
Yep.
there. That's
Absolutely.
the kickback to them. So I actually think that companies need to look at things more proactively on a vendor P&L level, and vendor being like insurance, health insurance level,
Right.
than they actually do. Sometimes I just feel like the companies just pay a bill because they're like, no, that's what it costs. And they
Necessary
don't
evil. Yep.
understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is, you should provide health insurance for your company,
Right.
but you should be a little bit more like understand that it's just like homeowners insurance. Like if you have, or auto insurance, if you have an anti-theft system on your car, or
Right.
you have like some of the other things, like I don't like they have all these like, checks and balances. You've taken a defensive driving course, and those things. All of a sudden, your rate comes down from maybe $1,000 every 6 months
Yep.
to like 800. Because they're like, well, you're being proactive on your overall health of your car. So the odds of you, when the actuaries run the numbers, the odds of you having a car break down or get stolen or whatever it might be, or get in an accident, are going to be a little bit less. So we're going to give you a discount on that because you're taking defensive driving, you have analog brakes and airbags and all this other stuff, right? In the same
Yep.
way that companies can think about that in a healthcare front. Well, if you have employees that are generally taking care of themselves a little bit more, then guess what? You can prove that, right? Through heart rate monitors and all that other stuff. Well, then you
Yep.
shouldn't have to pay as much. So
That's
I think
right.
that there's a lot. That's something I want to really push forward to, because right now I'm much more into a B2C level, like where it's business to consumer, and I want to go more on the B2B level as well. I think that's where I really want to start pushing the business
That's
forward more.
that's awesome. Yeah. Now, do you have people working for you?
I don't have any direct W-2s. I think in this world, in this day and age, the type of business I have, I don't necessarily need direct employees, but I have a handful of vendors that are all 1099 that do work. They're basically employees without technically being
Yep.
employees. They don't work. They don't work for me for 40 hours a week, but each one has their job, like of like video editing. That's not a full-time employment job. The social media stuff, that's a full-time employment job, but you're hiring them more as vendors because then they their own company set up, and then they can obviously work with many other clients across the board outside of just me in the fitness industry.
Right.
I mean, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's actually our model as well. We don't really have any W-2 employees. Everybody's kind of, 1099, but everybody's kind of bought into the program and what we're trying to accomplish, and we think that's better. It motivates people, and they're motivated to kind of earn their own way, which is kind of cool. So, well, I have really enjoyed. I was excited when I read your website. I said, "Oh man, this is
Thank you.
so really enjoyed it. Hopefully, you've enjoyed it as well."
I have. And if any of your listeners are interested too, the app, Prescribed Fitness app, is available in the Apple Store and iOS Store. So the Apple iOS Store for all Apple products, as well as the Google Play Store for Android products, and you can capture right to your smart TV from your smartphone. And it has a free 7-day trial. So you can give it a shot, and there's all nutrition on there every single month. There's new nutrition plans and great recipes for both meat and plant-based diets. So try to give as much quality product to the consumer and the member as possible. And something I'm really proud of. The member base is growing every day. If people are ever interested in the one-to-one executive coaching or accountability program, there's a link right there on my website at chrisfitness.com. It's executive coaching. Just fill out the little questionnaire right there. It's pretty simple. Takes about a minute or two to fill out, and then come to me, and then we can schedule a phone call.
That'd be great. Well, I really appreciate your time. Very good to meet you.
You too, Mitch.
Thanks for listening to Entrepreneur Perspectives. This show is produced by Quiet Loud Studios, where we create podcast writing and original media. Learn more at quietloudstudios.com.